Right, Steve, thanks very much for coming on. I appreciate you coming on here.
Okay.
You've got a big story really, and it's like we've said, it's impossible to talk about your story in one go. But I want to go back to kind of pre-military a little bit, leading into that bit of a backstory about you, really, before we get into anything else, and then just kind of go from there, to be honest. So are you all right going through a little bit of backstory leading up to your military, and then maybe talking a bit around your time in the military?
Yeah. So basically, I'm named Ste Holland, 41, from Northwich. For the last 20 years, I've sort of worked within the military, high-risk security and humanitarian sectors. Growing up, I was sort of come from a single household family, just me mum and my sister.
Yeah.
I always knew I wanted to join the military, and the thing that urged me to join was the events of 9/11. So from there, I tried to join, and I actually failed initially.
Okay.
I failed my medical when I initially tried to join the army. That was around 2002, 2003 time.
Yeah.
And as I pushed on and progressed forward, I reapplied when I was about 19.
Yeah.
And I was successful. And
Nice.
during that, I applied, did all my application, all the going to Lichfield and all that type of stuff, and
Yeah.
I was successful, and I joined the Cheshire Regiment, which was my local regiment at the time.
Yeah.
I joined in April 2005.
Okay.
Went to ITC Catterick because I joined the infantry, and then I went off to my unit sort of around November time in 2005, and then from there I was in the army for 10 years, deployed all over the world, sort of frontline combat operations. To Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan. But I've also deployed all over the world on various of different exercises, from the jungle to Kenya, all through Europe, you know.
Yeah.
So when I was in the army, I think post sort of World War II, it's probably one of the busiest times that the army had. You know, we were fighting 3 wars, Northern Ireland, Iraq and Afghanistan. And the rotations would come through quite quickly, you know, from an 18-month residential tour in Northern Ireland. Before you knew it, we were bouncing straight into Iraq. You know, coming back from Iraq, you're sort of preparing to go to Afghanistan, so it's quite relentless.
Yeah, it's quite full on.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's a quite a brush over from the military. I was a corporal, sort of went through my promotional courses to do that. And then sort of the turning point from the army was I deployed to Afghanistan in 2012, and we went to Helmand, you know, and I stepped into a senior position as a relatively sort of junior commander, because one of the sergeants was injured from a previous platoon, so I filled that gap, and from there, you know, I think Afghanistan, out of all my experiences within the military, was a very testing environment for me, because I was doing something that I absolutely loved and thrived, but I was stepping into a position that took a lot more responsibility, and the decisions that I made wasn't just a decision that I made for myself, it was for 30 other people as well.
Yeah.
You know, so we were in a place called Zarawar in Helmand province, in the Nadi Ali district. I was a part of B Company in 1 Mercian, 4 platoon, and ultimately our role was to ground hold a very politically and dangerous area of Kolpak. And the platoon that I had were relatively junior. There was a handful of people that had operational experience due to previous tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, but the majority of the platoon were just kids, mate, you know. And my platoon commander, who's a great friend of mine now, you know, and he was an excellent platoon commander, but he didn't have the experience what we had, you know, when ultimately people were looking at me for reassurance and to make the right decision.
Yeah.
We did 7 months in Afghanistan, and, you know, like I said, I haven't got enough time to go on about everything in Afghanistan, but I would say from my whole experience with the army, you know, I would say that 8 years after leaving the army was due down to the physical and mental pressures of Afghanistan, you know. And ultimately the thing that's almost killed me whether that's physically or mentally, which we'll talk about shortly, is the thing that's made me the person I am today. You know, and you can bounce back from it, you know, and it just takes a while to learn how to do that, you know, and so
How did you deal with the pressure of being in such that environment, and also obviously you've been used to being in that type of environment anyway, but being now the person that everybody looks to, like, how did you actually deal with that pressure there?
I don't know. It was just day by day. It was day by day. And what I learned, you know, from being in that position was you're always going to upset somebody, and your decision is never going to sit right with everybody. And ultimately, you just have to do what you feel is right at the time. And I made mistakes. But I also did some good things, you know, and Afghanistan was difficult, you know, and every decision that I made to either go left or right was a decision I made where I either got killed or somebody else got killed, you know, and that stuff stays with you, you know, and I'm not saying that is what happened, but when you have the pressure of that day in, day out, you know, you're constantly going through things and you're constantly sort of trying to mitigate all the risks. You know, how do you mitigate risk in Afghanistan? It's such a dangerous environment to be in, but you do somehow, you know, and you get through it. You know.
I suppose everything, like you said, then everything you learned during that time and those decisions that you was making have obviously led on to where, and we'll go on to the decisions that you make today and what you do now. And going from Afghanistan then to the next point of your life, really, what was next?
So I returned from Afghanistan, and the army is very organised in certain elements, but the army is not as organised in other elements. And what I mean by that is, I remember I had about 3 weeks left of the tour of Afghanistan in a place called Wahid, and I actually got a message on Facebook. Facebook was quite a new thing back then, and I'd managed to get onto a computer. I don't know how I did, because it's something we rarely used out there. And I had a message off the corporal that I was replacing at ITC Catterick saying, hi Dutch, you know, my name's so-and-so. Just to let you know, you're replacing me at ITC, which is the infantry training school.
Okay.
And I was like, oh. And I was never told, you know, my senior management never told me that I was being sent on an external posting. And ultimately I returned from Afghanistan, and within about 2, maybe 3 weeks of me being back home, I found myself in an environment where I was not ready for. I was not prepared to be in that environment. You know, for 18 months, you know, I've been preparing to go to war, including the 6 months, 7 months of being there. To then being put into an environment which is managed by Ofsted, to train civilians, to train kids, sort of 17 all the way up to like 35, you know, kids and grown men from various of different backgrounds, to teach them how to become fully fledged sort of infantry combat soldiers. And I did it, but that was the start of my problems. What did that look like? Are you okay to go into kind of that next step and what them problems kind of look like for you? Yeah, absolutely. You know, I was, you know, again, I was in a very managed environment. So for the last 18 months, you know, I've been calling the shots. I've been making the decisions, you know, and I've been out fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan. And all of a sudden my decision making and the way I do things were irrelevant. You know, I would do as I was told to do, you know, and I was in an environment which took a lot of patience. And it also took a lot of sort of training. You know, I was trained in a mission specific environment. You know, let's not forget that, you know, our conventional tactics were thrown out the window. And we were ultimately retrained into a mission-specific environment, which was Afghanistan. So all of a sudden being told that I was going back into a conventional setting and to teach people basic soldiering, I'd forgotten how to be a basic soldier. You know, I'd not forgotten the basics of being a soldier, but actual field craft, and you know, and I had to retrain myself very, very quickly, because the recruits that I trained, it wasn't their fault, you know, and with the person that I was going to do it with the absolutely best of my ability. Which I did. You know, we got various awards at the end of the training. I think a couple of my soldiers sort of got best recruit and best shot, you know, so they probably did see the impacts of my mood from time to time, which was inevitable in that environment. But I wanted to make sure that they passed out and they got what they needed to achieve, you know, and during that time I chose to leave the army. And that was a big decision for me. You know, I tried so desperately to be in the army, and to this day, it was the biggest mistake of my life, leaving the army. And I followed the crowd. I heard at that time there was a lot of work out in Iraq as a private security contractor. With my rank and my experiences, I fitted the sort of requirements to go and do that. And that's exactly what I did. I left the army, 7 clicks to freedom, they call it. Click, 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 didn't even think it through. And before you knew it, I'd left the army. And my last day in the army, and this is quite important, my last day in the army, out of the exemplary career that I had, from the multiple of operational tours that I've been on, I found myself on guard in a camp in Lancashire, which is the army. Basically, they send recruits to adventurous training, and there's a camp in Lancashire. And I was told to go and open and close gates all day. In my last day in the army, which had a huge effect on me, because all the commitment that I'd made, which was the ultimate sacrifice for my life, there was no thank you, there was no ceremony, there was no cheers, mate. It was, can you go and open and close gates all day and see you later type of thing. And that was a real kick.
Yeah, it's tough.
You know, but we just bounced back and get through it, you know, and ultimately that's what happened. You know, I left the army and I pursued a career within the hostile private security sector, and very quickly I deployed to Iraq.
So during that time, you kind of moved on into this new role in the same kind of environments, doing a different kind of role. What did this next part look like for you in Iraq?
It looked very similar to the military. Because I still had a gun. I was still with soldiers. Because you had to be a soldier to fit the requirements of being a contractor. And I was still in a hostile country. So I was still very comfortable in the environment that I was in. But I was so lost. You know, I was so lost. And the 8 years that followed, you know, I deployed back to all the places that I'd said I was never going to go back to, which was Iraq, which was Afghanistan, in a civilian capacity on various diplomatic and oil and gas contracts. And I was a very lost man. And I'd lost my sense of belonging. I'd lost the sense of identity. I didn't know who I was anymore. And a lot of my close friends who were still in the military and who still are, they knew what I was going through, and they were there to support me. And all I wanted to do was go back to the army. And I just couldn't. And I was just lost. So then when I said to you before, the thing that almost killed me physically and mentally was Afghanistan, you know, the mental setting then coming, you know, and I was lavishly spending, you know, working in the contractor world, you paid very well. That didn't make me happy. I was lavishly spending, and this problems really started at that point. You know, my mental health, didn't really know what was wrong with me. You know, I'd go out and buy a car, be bored 2 weeks later, go and buy another one because I could, which is great from the outside looking in. But the reality of it is, it was horrendous, you know, and I was just trying to find happiness by spending money, and it made me anything but happy.
suppose it's one of them when people maybe look at you, then they don't actually see really what's going on behind closed doors
fake.
in terms of your mind.
It's all an image.
Yeah.
They look at me type of thing, and what they see is not what they will get, you know. So.
And was you in that frame of mind right throughout that time that you was doing the contract, and is that pretty much how those next couple of years really look for you?
Yeah. So the next 8 years, I was jumping in and out of various different contracts in the UK. You know, started working within the high net worth sort of space in London, looking after sort of millionaires, and you know, sort of doing RST and close protection roles within the UK.
I was going to say, so it was all like protection work for people and stuff.
Which is very different than the hostile environment that you work in.
Yeah.
And that was sort of what I did for the next 6 years. During that time, my little boy was born in 2017. Logan. He absolutely saved my life. However, things got worse before they got better, because I now had a reason to be here, you know, and I had somebody needed me, you know, but I was still very lost and I had a lot of problems. As he was born, as he was a baby, I was still venturing off to Afghanistan. Yeah. Thinking, you know, like, as soon as I got there, I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, what am I doing here? And literally, what am I doing here? You know, the place that almost killed me, physically and mentally, I found myself back here, you know, and that's how it went, you know, and I was still craving that adrenaline stroke, finding my purpose as he was born. And that was it, you know, and ultimately I decided to take on an additional role in Iraq after Afghanistan. I worked on the British Embassy in Afghanistan. That whole place sort of collapsed and the Taliban sort of took over sort of after I left. And I started working back in Iraq. During this time, the pandemic hit. Sort of deployed to Iraq as you do, be back in a couple of weeks to the missus. And 7 months later, I got home. The pandemic hit, COVID hit, which we were absolutely we didn't know what the hell was going on. And 1 minute I'm in Iraq sort of doing my job, and the next minute we're battening down. There's this pandemic, no one knows what it is. It was killing a lot of people in Iraq, a lot of people, mainly local people. And for the next 7 months, mate, you know, I found myself locked in an environment sort of as essentially in jail. You know, we had very limited movement. I was very fortunate to be on a very good contract, which we had multiple gyms, we had good food, and I had a lot of good people around me. Some of my best friends from now, some of the people that I've continued to work with over the last couple of years. And I couldn't escape anymore, you know, and that's what I was very good at doing. And I was like, right, I'm off. See you later. Well, I wasn't off. You're staying here and you're not going anywhere type of thing, which was awful at the time, but it was possibly the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was left to deal with the problems, with my mental problems.
I suppose it's a whole new thing for you, that, isn't it? It's a new experience of having to stay put in that one place, which you'd never really had to deal with before. When you say it was possibly one of the best things, then what did that look like, that time, that kind of like being alone, kind of in that environment? What did that look like with nothing else to really do?
You found people that you wanted to be around. You know, it was a big contract, you know, and human nature dictates who you get on with and who you don't. You know, there's a lot of negativity on the contract, but I found myself in a very good circle of people. And we took up CrossFit, you know, and ultimately that become my life for 6-7 months. And it really, really helped me massively, you know, and it really I found my identity again, and I I was starting to make sense of a lot of things, and I was ultimately cold turkeying, and that's what you have to do. You know, reality needs to hit before you can start making change. And that's what it looked like. After 7 months, we have finally managed to get home. then I returned back into an environment which I do so much to run away from, which was being at home. Not used to being at home. And the world had changed. You know, the world had changed, mate. It wasn't the same. You know, sort of like get away from me type of thing, and you couldn't go to this and you couldn't do that. And it was strange, you know, and ultimately in the middle of all this, I was very limited on, I wasn't able to see my son, you know, because we had to isolate and, you know, all the stuff that come with that.
Yeah.
Then I found myself sort of going back and two. And then ultimately in 2021, back end of 2021, I come home on one of my final rotations from Iraq, and I left. And I don't know why I left, but I realised that I didn't want to be out there anymore. Yeah. And that was a good innings for me. You know, I think I was there for about 2.5 years, which was pretty stable for me. Yeah. Normally it's a few months and I'm off type of thing, and I'm going to go and find something else that I'm never going to get, you know. And ultimately I left, and things did start gradually getting worse at home, because then I sort of left the environment that I love being in, sort of back into an environment that I didn't want to be in.
I get you.
Yeah. So, and that was my time doing close protection in Iraq.
And everything you learned to this point kind of led to where you are now, and the stuff leading into now. And I know you then took on new roles, and kind of from the stuff that you'd obviously been through and seen, kind of gave you a whole new purpose in life. And that's where you are now, really, in terms of that. So are you okay talking through kind of this phase and kind of from where you want to start that until today, really, and what you actually do now? Yeah.
So I come home. I always knew that I had so much more to give, you know, and I always knew that something was coming. You know, I'd been dealt so many sort of bad cards, you know, and there had to be something positive on the other side. And I was just getting through life, you know, and I was being a dad. You know, Logan was growing up at that point, and I'm a good dad, you know, and he's my whole life. But I'm such a bad person being at home. I just am. You know, I shouldn't be at home. You know, I've got so much to give. And ultimately, I remember the Ukraine and Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February 2022. And I remember sitting at home with me mate who I was doing CrossFit with in Iraq. These good people, Richie, who was around me. And he was in Ukraine, and he phoned me saying, listen, we think the Russians are going to invade. I was like, well, I'm all right, thanks. Like, I'm not getting involved in that. Yeah. You know, like, sort of like go back to Iraq or Afghanistan type of thing, you know, for I'm not going anywhere near that. Yeah. So he said, you know, positions come up. Do you want to come out? No, thank you, mate. Good luck, and I'll see you when you come home. Anyway, 2 days later, I think it was the 28th of February, I found myself driving into Ukraine on my own in an armoured vehicle. You know, I was asked to go and pick up a Land Cruiser in Poland, as you do. You know, oh mate, on your way to Ukraine, can you just pick up this armoured vehicle for us and drive it to Kyiv? Oh, but don't go on that road because the Russians are there. You know, and I was like, yeah, mate, I'll go and pick up that armoured vehicle. And yeah, where do you want me to come? Yeah, okay, I'll meet you in Kyiv. The Russians were 17 kilometres away from the city. Wow. You know, and I ultimately drove in, and it was one of those typical squaddy moments. You get yourself in a world of pain, and then you go, shit, like, what am I doing here? Type of thing. Now I've got to get out of this. Squaddies are very good at doing that, and they're also very good at getting themselves out of it. However, I remember driving to the Medica crossing point, which is the border from Poland, one of the borders crossing from Poland into Ukraine. And as I was approaching an empty lane, what I felt was the whole of Ukraine was leaving with their whole life in a bag for life. It was cold. I remember it being bitterly cold. It was snowing, and there was thousands of people sort of left that country as I was driving in. And that was a bit of a, oh shit, like, where am I? You know, bit off a bit more what I can chew here. And that was it. And I drove into Ukraine, got to Lviv, and then the next day I drove to Kyiv, and that's when I started working for CNN. I got a job as a security advisor with CNN, and my main role was to support their journalists, to allow them to report and capture images of the war. The war at that time was in Kyiv, and for the next, I would say, 6 months, I was working with CNN and Warner Brothers, who ultimately own CNN, covering frontline journalism and a number of documentaries, which I was asked to be an advisor for.
Yeah.
And I've had the luxury to work with some of the biggest stars in the industry: Christiana Amanpour, Nick Patton-Walsh, Tyler Hicks, you know, and for the last 3 years, that's where I've been in Ukraine. And yeah, you know, I've been 400 meters away from the Russians in Donbass. You know, I've been chased by drones, you know, and I was so passionate about Ukraine. Let me just go back. When I went to Ukraine and when we were in Kyiv, it was just another gig for me. Okay? I was just took a gig just to put food on the table. And I always remember when the Russians left Kyiv, and they occupied a place called Irpin, Busha and Borodyanka, which were beautiful village suburbs on the outskirts of Kyiv. And the Russians were there, they occupied it. And when they left, that was huge news. And CNN at the time were on the tail end of them retreating. And I always remember going into Irpin, and I always remember going into Busha and Borodyanka. And what I seen was horrific. You know, what one human being could do to another. You know, coming from a military background where we know the difference between right and wrong. We're human beings, okay? And with what I seen and witnessed is something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. But how those people, what they did to women and children is horrific. And at that point, I made a stance that I would be in that country up until the day they win that war, because they will win the war eventually. And I'll be on Maiden Square celebrating with them. But that was a stance that I took. Was it dangerous? Yes, the most dangerous environment I've ever been to prior to Gaza, which we'll talk about shortly. But that was the moment and the turning point for me.
Yeah, and that's kind of almost fueled a passion and a drive in you to do what you do now as well. Can you talk about the next steps along the way in terms of Gaza and that environment, and like the kind of support that you give there? Yeah, absolutely. So just one on Ukraine before we move on to that. No, that's okay.
The whole humanitarian space, because there's multiple different factors within a war setting. You've got the military setting, you've got the security setting, and then you have the humanitarian setting. 3 different spaces you can work within a war environment. When I was in Ukraine, I was asked to provide security for an ITV team crew who were filming a film called Children of Ukraine. And again, I'm going to brush over this very quickly, but ultimately it was the documentary, which was aired on ITV, about how the war has affected children, okay? And I've been very used to getting a journalist and going, we're going that way, get your imagery, we're going. And I found very, very quickly that I was working with children and we weren't going in and out. We were going in and we were staying, you know, and I worked very closely with these children for about 3 months on and off as we're doing different parts of the documentary. And it was just harrowing, you know, what these children had been through. I highly advise you to watch the documentary, which is on ITV. But when I got asked to go to the screening in London, I watched it. And at that point, that's when I knew I was going to step into the humanitarian space.
Yeah. And
from there, I set up a project called Children of Ukraine. And ultimately, me and my mates that I was in Iraq with, my CrossFit mates, who are very good friends of mine, we chose to go back to Ukraine. to deliver Christmas presents and humanitarian aid because Christmas was coming up. And obviously we have continued to do that for the last, ultimately for the last 3 years. You know, and we've been back into Ukraine, and we've helped thousands of children, you know, not only giving them humanitarian aid and not only giving them Christmas presents, but also removing them and putting them into safe spaces and keeping them safe. And ultimately, I will continue to do that to the end of the war. Because of that, and because of that experience that I sort of innocently gained by just wanting to put a brighter side of humanity, word actually got about. The world that I work in is very small, okay? And there's a very small percentage of us that do what we do. So everybody ultimately knows each other. This year, a very good friend of mine started working out in Gaza, and ultimately advised me that there was a job taking place for a very big humanitarian company called the World Central Kitchen, and he asked me to apply for it, which ultimately I did. And in March of this year, I was successful. I got the job, and I am now the international security manager for the World Central Kitchen. But my main focal point is the Gaza activation. And what my role is I'd only been asked to go into that position because of the work I'd done in Ukraine within the humanitarian environment I was working in. So ultimately what I do now is we have a firm belief that no matter what is going on in the world, not one person should ever be deprived of a hot meal. Okay, and that is what the company stands by, irrelevant of what's going on. If that's a war, wildfire, earthquake, whatever it may be, a human being should not be deprived of a hot meal. And ultimately, that's what World Central Kitchen do. What my job is to do is to mitigate the risks that come with that. And it's difficult because it's Gaza. Gaza is very different than Ukraine. It's very small and it's extremely dangerous. The minute you step into Gaza, you're at risk up until the point where you come out. And if you turn left or right, it doesn't matter. In Ukraine, you know what you're getting yourself into and you know where to go to get away from it, unless it's a missile. But you can easily mitigate them. Gaza's a different setting, you know, because you are openly walking into an active war zone. And there's the threat, the innocent sort of blue on blue threat from the IDF, you know, if you could encroach onto their operations accidentally, you know, and obviously you've got the threat of Hamas, you know, who are the organisation that are inside Gaza. So all the risks that we take is huge, you know, and ultimately what I have to do is I have to make decisions. And my decisions are based on, do 15 people, this is an example, on this particular day, do 15 people run a very high risk of being killed, or do 2.1 million people starve to death? You know, and who am I to make that decision? You know, and those decisions, which I do make every day, are based on the last 20 years of what I have done. And leadership and decision making can only get better from making mistakes. And I've made a lot of mistakes in the past, mate, and I've learned from them. And ultimately, we have found ourselves in a position in Gaza where we are one of the only organisations that are feeding people. And I believe over the last 4 weeks, decision making that I have made and my colleagues, you know, we're responsible for feeding hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Internally, within the organisation, you're going to be a legend. Externally, you're going to be open to criticism. And no matter what you do, you're never going to make the right decision. And you're never going to keep everybody happy because everyone has an opinion on everything that you do. And I think over the years, I've just learned to just brush it off because you're not in that position. And if you want to come and sit here and make these decisions, well, be my guest. You know, and I think that takes a huge amount of resilience, you know.
Oh, yeah, massively. And your journey that you've been on from the beginning to that point that you've spoke about in Gaza, each one of those, like each like little chapter along the way of that, you could probably write a book on, because there's that much stuff that you would be able to go through. And what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to fire a couple of quick fire questions at you as well, just to get a little bit of information and knowledge around just general mindset that you've got, because everything you've spoke about then, a lot of it is around that mindset and that resilience, like you've just mentioned, that you have built, and you've got yourself into a place where you're able to make these decisions, which has only come from 20 years of difficult experience. So I do have a couple of quick fire questions for you to talk about on the kind of mindset piece, but just as a it's difficult to answer, but as a kind of biggest lesson for you, what would be kind of the biggest lesson that you think you might have learned over these last few years that have led to being able to do what you can do now?
Make the decision your own, and don't divert from it, because ultimately you're in a position and you are being paid to make decisions. And don't listen to external noise, and do not let other people influence your decision, because I've fallen foul of that in the past, and ultimately it's been the wrong decision, so I would say from that point that you are there for a reason, because someone who sits in a bit higher position than you believes in you. So make a decision and stick by it, and don't let other people influence you to do something else.
What would be the advice you would give to anybody, if there's something you could say to them now that is in that position of that rock bottom, where it is a turning point where they do need to, turn something around to get themselves back on the right track?
Get yourself up, dust yourself off, and start finding a way. My biggest cure was to help people. And if you can help somebody in the smallest way, by adjusting their mindset or making them believe in themselves, that's a very good starting point, and that's not necessarily going to make you better, but it's definitely going to make you feel better about yourself. And listen, it took me 8 years, 8 years to get myself in a position which I am now. And I am very aware that these things can escalate and come on again, but it's about finding a positive mindset, okay, and finding a positive out of a negative. And I know it's very cliche, but it's true. And the main thing you've just got to get up is put one foot in front of the other and just take the day on. Just take it on, okay, and help people, and it will help you.
When it comes to, and this is something I struggle with myself as well, and I'm obviously at nowhere near the decision making that you're making, but I know a lot of people struggle about just generally keeping calm under pressure. Now, you've been in some high pressure environments, to say the least. What do you do to keep your mind kind of calm to make the right decision at that time?
I put myself in an environment where I'm on my own. Again, external influence. If you are making a decision, whether that is to go to the shop, which some people find extremely hard to walk outside and go to the shop, or if you're making the decisions which are going to affect hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, sit back, remove yourself from an environment and think about it on your own, and that's what helps me, and often, I'm found sat on my own, clicking a pen, like, "You all right, mate?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just having a moment." I think it's important that everybody has that time alone.
Just give yourself that space.
Just give yourself space. Put some music on. I've always got my headphones on at work. Put some music on and just think about what you're doing, and it really does work. And I found that some people who are trying to help, they're not helping. They're just making noise. Innocently or not, it's not helping you. So just remove yourself and have some time on your own.
I think the last thing I just wanted to ask you as well, there could be a million things I ask you, but I'm going to limit it to this one now. So what you do makes such a big impact, and so many other people, want to help other people as well in whatever capacity. Even me, I want to help people in this world of what I do, and this podcasting, giving people like yourself a space to do it, is because I want to help other people as well. So what kind of message do you want to give to people that just want to help others? And anyone listening to this, like, what's your kind of message to them if they want to help other people in the world as well? Like, you've got that drive and that passion yourself.
Yeah. I think it comes from how in depth you want to help people. You know, mine's quite in depth, you know, and that's just something that I've built on over time. And it all come from a random thought is, I'm going to go and do this, you know. And I think if anybody wants to do it, you know, you can start off by doing it by offering someone help, you know, helping somebody to do the garden, or helping somebody to go to the shop, or just start the foundations of just being a kind and nice person, you know, and help can be so little. It doesn't have to be on the scale as what I'm doing, but you will go to bed at night and you will know that you've made a difference in somebody's life, whether that's your next door neighbours or not. And, you know, it all boils down to, we all can change. We've all got a past. Every single one of us has got a past, and we've all made mistakes. But if you can wake up the next day and start to be a kind person and start to be considerate about other people's feelings, that will make you such a better human being. And that is the stance that I've got now. You know, I just want to be a better human being and try to put a brighter side from the darkest side of humanity.
Firstly, thanks you obviously for all the service that you do and everything you have done. And from my point, just thanks obviously for coming here and share, you know, using this platform to share your story. You're somebody I think that people need to know about and what you do. And I know kind of all the different kind of, you know, social media bits and the articles and the documentaries that you're involved in and stuff like that. Yeah. Hopefully, you know, if anyone watches this, then that kind of links them to that as well. And just the overall message of what you're doing and stuff is, and other people that you do know and work with, you know, is shared.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. No worries. Appreciate it's been a pleasure. Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.